Conor McGregor may still be one of the biggest stars in combat sports, but odds makers are clearly not convinced ahead of his UFC 329 return against Max Holloway. Early betting lines reportedly opened with McGregor as a heavy underdog in the rematch, reflecting widespread uncertainty surrounding his condition after nearly 5 years away from active competition. The odds immediately became one of the biggest talking points following the official announcement of McGregor versus Holloway 2. While McGregor defeated Holloway back in 2013, the circumstances surrounding the rematch are dramatically different now. Holloway enters the fight as one of the UFC's most active and durable elite fighters, while McGregor returns after an extremely long layoff and a devastating leg injury suffered against Dustin Poirier in 2021. Many analysts believe inactivity is the biggest factor driving the betting line. By the time UFC 329 takes place, McGregor will not have fought in almost 5 full years. Very few fighters in MMA history successfully return from such a long absence directly into championship-level competition. Meanwhile, Holloway continued competing regularly against elite opposition throughout that entire period. The former featherweight champion remains known for his relentless pace, elite conditioning, and ability to maintain non-stop pressure over 5 rounds. Exactly the type of style many believe could create major problems for a returning McGregor. Even so, McGregor's supporters continue insisting the odds underestimate his striking ability and knockout power. At his peak, McGregor possessed some of the sharpest counter-striking the sport has ever seen, and fans still believe his precision and timing could instantly change a fight, regardless of inactivity. The matchup itself also carries enormous historical significance, because the first fight happened before either man became a global superstar. Now, more than a decade later, the rematch arrives as one of the UFC's biggest possible blockbuster fights. The betting odds simply show how differently many people now view both fighters compared to the first meeting. For Holloway, the fight represents a chance to finally avenge one of the earliest losses of his UFC career. For McGregor, it is an opportunity to prove he can still compete at the elite level, despite years of inactivity and growing doubts surrounding his future. Regardless of the odds, UFC 329 is already shaping up as one of the most anticipated comeback fights in recent MMA history. Dana White revealed that the UFC is already dealing with a major logistical issue ahead of its planned White House event: bugs. The UFC president admitted organizers still do not know how to fully solve what could become a serious insect problem during the massive outdoor card planned for the White House grounds later this year. The event, which is expected to be one of the biggest spectacles in UFC history, will reportedly take place outside, creating unusual production challenges compared to standard arena shows. White openly acknowledged that insects and lighting could become a frustrating issue once cameras, floodlights, and nighttime conditions are involved. "We've got a bug problem," White admitted while discussing preparations for the historic event. The unexpected issue quickly became a talking point among fans because of how unusual it sounds in relation to a major UFC card. The White House event is already being promoted as a once-in-a-generation spectacle featuring several enormous fights, including Ilia Topuria versus Justin Gaethje and Alex Pereira's heavyweight showdown against Cyril Gane. However, because the card is expected to take place outdoors on government property rather than inside a traditional arena, the UFC is being forced to solve problems it rarely encounters during normal events. White reportedly explained that the production team is still trying to figure out how to manage insects being drawn toward the massive lighting setup required for nighttime broadcasting. While the issue may sound humorous at first, outdoor live broadcasts often face legitimate complications involving bugs, weather conditions, sound management, and visibility under strong lighting systems. Fans online immediately reacted with jokes about fighters battling insects inside the cage during face-offs or interviews. Still, the UFC appears fully committed to making the White House event happen despite the unusual complications. The card itself has already generated huge attention because of both its location and the fights attached to it. Many insiders believe the event could become one of the most heavily watched cards in UFC history if everything goes according to plan. Even with the bug issue, White sounded determined to find solutions before fight night arrives. The comments also offered a rare glimpse into the logistical side of organizing an event unlike anything the UFC has attempted before.
Ardelean is still trying to process the fact that she made UFC history with one of the rarest submissions ever seen inside the octagon, especially because by her own admission, she is just a blue belt. Ardelean stunned fans at UFC Vegas after submitting Polyana Viana with a rare capsule lock, becoming the first fighter in UFC history to finish an opponent using the technique. The unusual submission immediately became one of the most talked about moments from the event because many fans and even experienced fighters had never seen the move successfully applied at the highest level of MMA before. Following the victory, Ardelean admitted even she was surprised by how everything unfolded. "The craziest part is I'm a blue belt," Ardelean said while reacting to the historic finish. The Romanian fighter explained that the submission itself was not something she intentionally entered the fight searching for specifically. Instead, the opportunity developed naturally during a grappling exchange once she recognized Viana's leg position and realized the technique was available. Once the hold was locked in, Viana verbally tapped almost immediately due to the pressure and pain generated by the submission. The stoppage instantly created confusion among some viewers because the capsule lock is rarely seen in MMA competition compared to more traditional submissions like arm bars, rear naked chokes, or heel hooks. As replay footage circulated online, fans quickly realized how dangerous the technique could become once fully applied. For Ardelean, the moment represented far more than simply winning a fight. The victory immediately became the biggest moment of her UFC career and transformed her into one of the most discussed fighters from the event. Scoring a historic first inside the UFC automatically placed her name into the record books, something few fighters ever accomplish regardless of championship status. The achievement felt even more surprising considering Ardelean's relatively modest grappling rank. In modern MMA, elite submission specialists are often black belts with years of advanced competition experience. That reality made Ardelean's comments about being a blue belt stand out even more after successfully pulling off such a rare and technical finish on the sport's biggest stage. Despite the historic nature of the submission, Ardelean also showed concern and respect toward Viana afterward. Many fans worried about Viana immediately after the fight because the submission appeared extremely painful in real time. Fortunately, Viana later reassured supporters online that she was okay and thanked fans for their support following the loss. The capsule lock finish has already sparked widespread discussion throughout the MMA community, with many fighters and analysts now studying the technique more closely after seeing it executed successfully in the UFC. Moments like this are rare in modern MMA, where genuinely new or uncommon submissions almost never appear at the elite level anymore. That reality is part of what made Ardelean's finish feel so significant. Not only did she win impressively, but she also delivered one of the most unique submissions the UFC has ever seen, all while still describing herself as a blue belt.
Strickland is once again raising eyebrows across the MMA world after reports claimed the former UFC middleweight champion has been ignoring his medical suspension and continuing to spar intensely inside the gym. According to the reports, Strickland has remained fully active in training despite being suspended medically following his recent fight. The controversial middleweight allegedly continues hard sparring sessions and gym wars even while doctors recommended time away from competition and contact training. The situation immediately sparked concern among fans and fighters because Strickland is already known for one of the most extreme gym lifestyles in MMA. For years, Strickland has openly talked about using fighting as a way to deal with personal struggles and mental battles outside the cage. He frequently describes sparring and constant training as essential parts of his daily life rather than simply preparation for scheduled fights. Reports surrounding the current situation suggested Strickland has continued fighting demons in the gym despite the suspension, reinforcing the image many fans already associate with him. A fighter who seemingly never fully stops training, regardless of injuries or recovery recommendations. Strickland's intense sparring habits have become legendary within MMA circles. Multiple fighters who trained with him over the years described his gym sessions as unusually aggressive and competitive, even compared to elite-level standards. Some fans admire that mentality as part of what made Strickland a UFC champion, while others increasingly worry about the long-term physical and mental toll it may eventually create. The controversy also reignited ongoing discussions regarding fighter safety and medical suspensions in MMA. While athletic commissions can officially suspend fighters after injuries or damaging fights, enforcing restrictions on gym activity and sparring remains far more difficult. Fighters are technically expected to follow medical guidance, but there is often little oversight regarding what happens behind closed doors during training. Strickland has never hidden his dislike for inactivity or recovery periods. Throughout his career, he repeatedly expressed discomfort with taking time away from fighting and often described training as one of the only things that gives him structure mentally. Even after becoming champion, Strickland maintained the same reputation for constant sparring and relentless gym activity that defined him earlier in his career. Now, with reports claiming he is once again training through a suspension, fans remain divided between admiration for his mentality and concern over the long-term consequences.
Nate Diaz has reportedly been handed a 6-month medical suspension following his punishing stoppage loss to Mike Perry at the massive MVP MMA event headlined by Ronda Rousey's comeback against Gina Carano. The suspension was issued because of injuries Diaz suffered during the fight, where Perry overwhelmed the longtime fan favorite with relentless pressure and heavy combinations before the referee finally stepped in. Officials reportedly noted the suspension could potentially be shortened if Diaz receives medical clearance from doctors earlier than expected. The loss became one of the most physically damaging defeats of Diaz's recent career. Throughout the fight, Perry repeatedly landed clean power shots that visibly slowed Diaz down as the bout progressed. Even though Diaz continued trying to push forward and absorb punishment like he has throughout most of his career, the damage eventually became too much for the referee to ignore. The stoppage immediately triggered another wave of retirement discussions surrounding Diaz, especially considering the amount of punishment he has absorbed over the course of 2 decades competing in combat sports. Despite that, Diaz quickly rejected any suggestion that he plans to retire. Following the fight, Diaz reportedly dismissed the criticism and insisted the show goes on, making it clear he still intends to continue fighting despite the heavy defeat and now the 6-month suspension. The situation once again highlighted the complicated position Diaz occupies in modern combat sports. On one hand, he remains one of the most recognizable and beloved fighters of his generation. On the other, growing concerns continue surrounding the long-term damage accumulated through years of brutal wars inside both MMA and boxing rings. Diaz has built his entire career around toughness, durability, and refusing to back down under pressure. That identity helped turn him into one of the UFC's biggest cult stars, especially during legendary fights against Conor McGregor, Jorge Masvidal, Donald Cerrone, and countless others. However, many fans now openly question how much punishment Diaz should continue taking at this stage of his career. Even with the suspension, Diaz's popularity remains enormous. His appearance on the Netflix-streamed MVP MMA card generated huge attention and played a major role in the event becoming one of the most talked-about combat sports shows of the year. Whether Diaz eventually returns after the suspension or decides to slow down his activity remains uncertain, but based on his reaction following the Perry loss, retirement clearly is not something he wants people discussing around him anytime soon. Alex Pereira finally addressed the chaos involving Josh Hokett after the explosive UFC Freedom 250 press conference, and while Pereira mostly laughed off the situation, he still delivered some brutal personal comments afterward. The altercation became one of the biggest stories in MMA after tensions exploded during the White House promotional event for UFC Freedom 250. Hokett repeatedly targeted Pereira verbally during the press conference, eventually triggering a furious reaction from UFC lightweight champion Ilia Topuria, who reportedly threw a bottle or bottle cap toward Hokett once the insults crossed the line. Security quickly rushed in as the stage descended into chaos. Pereira later explained that he did not fully understand many of the comments in real time because of the language barrier, but he quickly realized things had escalated once Topuria stepped in aggressively to defend him. "I think Topuria took offense to that," Pereira explained afterward, while praising the lightweight champion for stepping up like a brother. Although Pereira mostly brushed off Hokett's attempts to provoke him, he still took several shots back afterward. "Maybe he doesn't even get along with his family," Pereira said, while criticizing Hokett after the event. The Brazilian superstar also described Hokett as a problematic person and suggested few people actually like him behind the scenes. The incident only increased attention surrounding UFC Freedom 250, which is already shaping up as one of the biggest cards in recent promotional history. Pereira is scheduled to move up to heavyweight for a massive fight against Cyril Gane, while Topuria prepares for a title showdown against Justin Gaethje. Instead of discussions staying fully centered on the fights themselves, however, the press conference confrontation quickly became one of the dominant storylines online. For many fans, the situation also highlighted the growing friendship between Pereira and Topuria. Pereira later revealed that Topuria even allowed him and his team to travel on his private jet to the White House event, something Pereira publicly appreciated while discussing how much respect exists between the two champions. Now, after the chaotic press conference, that bond appears even stronger. Jorge Masvidal and Dustin Poirier both believe Conor McGregor vs. Max Holloway 2 will be one of the biggest fights of the year, but they completely disagree on who actually wins the rematch. The fight, officially booked for UFC 329, marks McGregor's first return to the octagon in nearly 5 years and instantly became one of the most heavily debated matchups in MMA. Masvidal appeared far more optimistic regarding McGregor's comeback chances. According to the former BMF champion, McGregor's timing, precision, and knockout power still make him an extremely dangerous fighter if he returns anywhere close to his previous level. Masvidal suggested McGregor's ability to control range and counter aggressively could still trouble Holloway early in the fight. Poirier, however, sounded much less convinced. The former interim lightweight champion questioned how McGregor will handle Holloway's pace after such a long layoff. Poirier specifically pointed toward Holloway's relentless volume, conditioning, and pressure as factors that could become overwhelming for someone returning after years away from active competition. The matchup carries major historical significance because the first fight happened all the way back in 2013. At the time, both men were still developing prospects rather than global stars. McGregor won the original fight by decision, despite suffering a knee injury during the bout, while Holloway was still an inexperienced young featherweight early in his UFC journey.
More than a decade later, both fighters are now legends of the sport. Holloway enters the rematch as one of the most respected and battle-tested fighters in UFC history. Over the years, he evolved into a former featherweight champion known for incredible cardio, elite boxing combinations, and unbelievable durability. McGregor, meanwhile, remains one of the biggest attractions combat sports has ever produced, despite the inactivity surrounding his career. The biggest question surrounding the fight remains McGregor's condition. By the time UFC 329 arrives, he will not have competed in almost 5 years following his devastating leg injury against Dustin Poirier in 2021. Very few fighters in MMA history have successfully returned from such a long absence directly into elite competition. Still, McGregor's star power continues, making every possible comeback feel enormous. Jorge Masvidal and Dustin Poirier's split opinions perfectly reflect the overall feeling surrounding the matchup. Some believe McGregor's striking brilliance can still carry him back into title contention, while others think Holloway's activity and pressure will simply be too much after such a long layoff. Either way, UFC 329 now carries one of the most fascinating comeback storylines the sport has seen in years. A shocking new report claims the UFC has officially removed Colby Covington from its active roster, potentially ending one of the most controversial and polarizing runs in modern MMA history. Although the UFC has not publicly confirmed the move yet, multiple reports indicate Covington's name disappeared during a recent roster update tied to the promotion's latest wave of fighter cuts. If true, the decision would officially close the chapter on one of the loudest personalities the UFC has seen over the past decade. Colby became famous not only for his fighting ability, but for building an entire persona around non-stop trash talk, political controversy, and personal feuds with some of the biggest names in the sport. Whether fans loved him or hated him, Covington consistently generated attention every time he opened his mouth. Inside the cage, he also achieved legitimate success. The former interim welterweight champion fought for undisputed UFC gold multiple times and remained one of the division's top-ranked fighters for years. His rivalries with Kamaru Usman, Jorge Masvidal, Leon Edwards, and Tyron Woodley helped shake much of the UFC welterweight division throughout the late 2010s and early 2020s. However, Covington's recent career momentum slowed dramatically. Inactivity became a growing issue over the past several years, with Covington fighting far less frequently than most top contenders. Critics also increasingly questioned whether his ranking remained justified as younger contenders continued climbing through the division while Covington remained inactive outside occasional high-profile appearances. Outside the cage, Covington remained one of the sport's most divisive figures. Some fans appreciated his willingness to fully embrace the role of villain and create entertainment around fights, while others strongly disliked the personal nature of many of his promotional tactics and public comments. Regardless of opinion, however, few fighters managed to remain as consistently relevant and controversial as Covington did during his UFC run. If the release is ultimately confirmed officially by the UFC, it will immediately create speculation about where Covington could potentially fight next. Promotions like PFL, BKFC, or crossover MMA organizations would likely have strong interest in signing a recognizable name with Covington's profile and ability to generate headlines. For now, though, the reported removal signals the possible end of one of the UFC's most chaotic and unforgettable welterweight eras. Polyana Viana has spoken out following her painful submission loss to Ardelean at UFC Vegas, reassuring fans that she is doing okay after the historic defeat. The Brazilian strawweight suffered one of the most unusual losses seen inside the octagon after Ardelean submitted her with a rare capsule lock, a finish that was later recognized as the first of its kind in UFC history.
The strange and painful-looking submission immediately sparked concern among fans watching the event, especially because Viana appeared to be in serious discomfort during the stoppage. After receiving an outpouring of support online, Viana finally addressed the situation directly through a short message to fans. "Hey guys, I am okay. Thank you all for the messages and for worrying about me. Love you guys." The statement quickly reassured supporters who had been worried following the unusual nature of the submission. The fight itself had already become one of the most talked-about moments from UFC Vegas because of the historic finish. Ardelean controlled large portions of the matchup before eventually trapping Viana in a rare leg submission during a grappling exchange on the ground. Once the pressure was fully applied, Viana verbally tapped almost immediately as the referee rushed in to stop the fight. The finish generated major attention throughout the MMA world because very few fans and even many fighters had ever seen the technique used successfully inside high-level competition before. For Viana, the loss marked another difficult setback in an already inconsistent UFC run. Known for her aggressive grappling style and finishing ability, Viana has always been dangerous offensively, particularly in submission exchanges. However, against Ardelean, she ultimately found herself caught in an unfamiliar position that quickly forced the stoppage. Despite the disappointment, fans responded positively to Viana's message and were relieved to hear she avoided any major long-term injury following the painful submission. The reaction also highlighted the respect Viana has built among MMA fans over the years because of her entertaining style and willingness to constantly chase finishes.
Alex Pereira revealed that Topuria not only helped him and his team travel to the UFC White House event on a private jet, but also defended him like a brother when tensions exploded during the now infamous press conference altercation involving Josh Hockett. Speaking after the chaotic media event, Pereira expressed gratitude toward the UFC lightweight champion and explained that Topuria stepped in immediately once things began escalating on stage. According to Pereira, Topuria invited him and his team onto his private jet for the trip to the White House event, something Pereira described as a major gesture of respect and friendship between the two champions. "It was very good to have him around," Pereira said while discussing the experience. "He gave us a ride on his jet to the White House." The comments added another layer to the growing bond between the two stars, who have become increasingly close during recent UFC promotional appearances and events. However, the biggest moment came during the explosive press conference itself. Pereira explained that he did not fully understand what Josh Hockett was saying because of the language barrier, but he quickly realized the situation was becoming hostile once Topuria reacted aggressively from nearby. "I don't understand English, and I think Topuria took offense to that. Topuria saw that, and he stepped up as a brother." According to Pereira, Topuria became angry after feeling Hockett was disrespecting him publicly and crossing the line with personal comments. The lightweight champion reportedly reacted by throwing a bottle or bottle cap toward Hockett during the heated exchange, once security and fighters started shouting over each other. The incident immediately became one of the biggest viral moments from the UFC Freedom 250 media tour. Videos from the event showed chaos erupting on stage as security rushed to separate fighters and officials attempted to regain control of the press conference. Hockett's repeated verbal attacks toward Pereira appeared to trigger the confrontation, especially after the comments continued escalating despite visible tension among fighters present. Pereira did not hold back while discussing Hockett afterward either. "To me, Hockett is a clueless guy. He's the kind of guy who doesn't get along with his family. He's a problematic guy. He's a guy that nobody likes. I'm sure he's a troubled guy." The sharp comments reflected how seriously Pereira viewed the situation and how much he appreciated Topuria stepping in during the confrontation. The White House press conference was already one of the most heavily watched UFC promotional events in years because of the massive fights attached to the Freedom 250 card. Pereira is scheduled to move up to heavyweight for a historic clash against Cyril Gane, while Topuria prepares for a title showdown against Justin Gaethje. Instead of discussion remaining fully centered on the fights, however, the Hockett altercation quickly dominated headlines across the MMA world. For many fans, the situation also highlighted the growing friendship and mutual respect between Pereira and Topuria. Both champions have repeatedly praised each other publicly over the past year, and Pereira's latest comments reinforced how close their relationship has become behind the scenes.